Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well and that you are ready for part two of Best Practices for Proficiency. Once again, my name is Carmen Scoggins, and I teach Spanish in Boone, North Carolina at Watauga High School. And I also am an adjunct instructor at Appalachian State University, where I get to teach the methodology class to future world language teachers. And we know we need some new teachers out there. I would again like to thank Carmen Villalobos for inviting me to do these webinars for you. I have a little confession to make. This is actually the first time I've ever done anything like this. So this has been a great learning experience for me, and I appreciate your patience as I navigate this for the first time. I always like to learn something new, so this has been a great challenge for me. Okay, let's get started. Don't forget our goals are I can assist my students in setting achievable goals and reflect on my own practices. And remember the importance and the power of reflection. I think that's the piece that as teachers we sometimes don't take the time to do because we have so many other things to do. But honestly, this is where we're going to grow the most. And if you ever do national boards, then that's one of the biggest pieces you have to do is reflect. Also, using backward design and the 6 core practices. You should always keep those things in mind when you're planning a unit or even your daily lessons, because those things will help you always keep with the end in mind and work towards your destination. And finally, guiding your students down their own path to proficiency. Remember, these are just suggested verbs that you can use on the path. Yesterday or whenever you listen to part one, we focused on the teacher path, and these are the verbs that I chose. And today we are focusing specifically on the student path. And I have to give Nicole Naditz credit for this idea because she used her syllabus in this way, and then I turned kind of the same idea into a giant bulletin board that's in my classroom so that my students have this in front of them every single day. So I think sometimes when we get beginning language students, they don't really know what to expect when learning another language because they've never done it before. So having kind of a guide, a roadmap per se, in front of them all the time helps them stay really focused. So this today is going to be about the student perspective of the path to proficiency. Okay, let's get started. So first of all, we start with identify by understanding how you learn. Have you ever asked your students how they learn? We all learn differently, and we know that, and we all have different likes and dislikes about ways that people present things to us. I'm a very visual learner. I am not a good listener. I mean, I am a good listener in life, but as far as like if someone's giving me directions, I have to write them down because I will never remember them. So it's important to understand that kids are like that too. A lot of my students identify as being a kinesthetic or hands-on learner. And if you think about what that looks like in the language classroom, you have to be kind of creative because it's harder to do kinesthetic activities when learning a language. We automatically think of auditory or visual things, but get your kids up moving around a lot because typically, especially if they're middle and high school age, they need to get out of their seats. And if you can connect learning a language with movement, it's going to only be internalized even more. So take the time and ask them how they learn. If they've never done a learning style inventory, there are tons online. You can just Google. Keep it really simple. I don't go beyond these 3 different learning styles very often, even though there are many other learning styles out there. But at least this gives you a starting point, and it gives them a starting point to think, I'm not a good listener either, so I'm probably going to need to write this down. Next, in understanding how you learn, I mentioned in the first part webinar that you really need to tap into student interest and get to know your students. Tap into what they like. Be sure, I know you're so busy, but try to go to their plays and their sporting events and concerts and chaperone dances because that's just going to give you a better understanding of your students. If I take the time to do that, to go to something that my students like to do, they are going to say, wow, she really took some time out for me. So then when they're in the classroom and I'm trying to share things with them that are important for us to learn, then they're more apt to listen because they saw me there in the stands cheering for them or in the auditorium just clapping away because they know that I care about them. And again, that building student relationship piece is critical if you're going to have them learn the language that you're trying to teach them. Also, occasionally I might use a word cloud like these you see in front of you. My students use Tuxedo to make these. And the cool thing about using Tuxedo is not only can they put in the language that we're practicing or words that they know, but they also can choose a shape to put it into. So I know that this guy is a musician just from looking at the fact that he chose a guitar, the shape of a guitar. And that was really important to him. And now I know a little bit about him, that he's rubio and comico, un poquito gordo, but that he also likes music. And that tells me a lot. Anne had just come back from a mission trip in Africa, and so she chose the image of Africa. And Laura, I have such great kids, loves to do service learning projects, and so she chose the shape of the hand. So all those words inside the word cloud tell me something about the students, but also the shape that they chose is very powerful in me getting to know my students a little bit more. Ask students to think about learning. We're trying to set them up for a future of learning. Remember that we teach our students a lot more than just the language we're trying to teach them. So ask students to reflect spontaneously on different quotes, or just to get them to think about, yeah, this is how I would verbalize this. I ask students to think about the quote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Let's listen to what a couple of them had to say. Let's try that one more time.
So, Laura, when I say the limits of my language mean the limits of my world, what does that mean to you?
It means that it is the limit of my world because you can't go any farther and it holds you back without knowing the language.
Thank you. Okay, Connor, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. That means to you what?
That, like, if you don't learn a different language, you're kind of saying restricted your own culture. So by learning a different language, you know how other people live in the world.
So by knowing another language, you understand how other people live in the world. That is so powerful. That kid was a freshman. Just to get him to say that out loud, wow. So try maybe doing some of that with your kids. Okay, here is a learner profile that I actually created. Some of you might use note cards. Like on the first day, you might have your students fill out note cards with their address or their parents' email or whatever you might, again, interests. They might list the things that they like to do. But I have my kids do this instead. They can put a little picture right here if they want to. It's always shocking to see what year the students were born in now. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so old. But here's a place for them to indicate their learning style, their preferred learning style. They give me their schedule. Remember, I'm at a high school, so we have 2 semesters, of course. What are their educational goals? Are they planning to go to a 4-year university, to a community college, into the workforce, into the military? And we'll come back to this in just a minute, setting some SMART goals for our time together. I learn best when how are they going to contribute to our class? And then how, as the teacher, can I give them what they need? And then they tell me a little bit of the things they like to do in their free time. You actually have, you can see because there's a hand here, if you just click this image, you can borrow this template. You can change it any way you want that meets your needs. But I found this to be very valuable. It's a fast way for me to get to know a little bit about my students. So check it out if you're interested. Okay. So now we're on the second stage of the path to proficiency, reach by setting attainable goals. I'm sure you all recognize these 5 C's. This is an actual image of the C's hanging on my wall. They're called the World Readiness Standards now, and the image looks a little differently, but it took me a long time to make this, so I'm going to leave it up. Yeah, and so these are, of course, the 5 C's: cultures, connections, comparisons, communities, and communications. And I tell my students that this is what they should be expecting from me. We often talk about what are the expectations of our students in our class, but what expectations do they have of me? So I go through these 5 C's and we talk about what they mean. First of all, I have them actually brainstorm what they think they mean, and then we talk about them in terms of what they actually mean according to ACTFL and so forth. If you need more information about the 5 C's, these have been around for a really long time. You can just Google the World Readiness Standards and find out lots of information. And it's great to hear my students using the actual lingo, the vocab that my colleagues and I use, because they are familiar with it, because I put it right in front of their faces. Same thing with the proficiency levels. These are also displayed in my classroom. And once again, I familiarize my students with the correct terminology so that they kind of understand where I'm coming from. And they need to know. So my students start out, my level 1 start out at novice low. And by the end, they probably should actually be about novice high. I need to move these arrows a little bit, but it's just to give them the idea that this journey is going to take some time. It's not going to be, after 5 months together, and they're not going to be super proficient. And what does that actually mean? So we talk about those things as well. And ACTFL has some amazing resources too on what native speakers or language learners, I should say, sound like at these different proficiency levels. So if you're interested in that, I'll be happy to share that link with you, or you can find it on the actfl.org website. It's really cool, and my kids love hearing the actual examples. And another thing I do is I encourage my kids, I give them a little bit of time to think about something they had to learn to do, like ride a bike. Now we're in the Appalachian Mountains, so some of my guys wanted to compare learning a language to skiing. So they just made a quick Google slide presentation, and I'll show it to you very, very quickly. So a novice level skier is going to have little control, no landing skills, that sounds about right. Intermediate, more control, better awareness, a few tricks. And that's so true with intermediate speakers of a language, wouldn't you say? Advanced, you've got lots of control, some inverted tricks. Now you're talking superior. Wow, you're there. And these girls, man, they blew me away with their analogy. These were two of probably my best students, and they were also avid cross-country runners, and they actually broke it down into, this looks a little bit odd, but that's okay, you know what it says, low, mid, and high. So they really got to see, wow, novice low can't be separated from their parent, can't lift their head, complains. That is exactly what a novice low beginning language speaker is like, right? They have to be with us in order to produce the language. Not necessarily, but you know what I'm saying. They complain all the time. And then they just went on through intermediate low, can walk with assistance, can often express needs. And that's exactly on point with learning a language. And so by having my students relate learning a language to something they had to learn to do, man, this really helps them understand proficiency. And it's just a whole new perspective for them, the concept of proficiency. So this puts it into words that they can understand. So try that out with your students if you feel so inclined. Okay, so you noticed on the learner profile there was a place that said SMART. And of course, the SMART acronym stands for setting goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And it's kind of hard to set goals. If you've ever had to write a real SMART goal, then God bless you, because it is not the easiest thing to do. So obviously I water this down a little bit for my students. I don't go into a lot of specifics about how to officially write a SMART goal, but I do ask them to write maybe 1 or 2 things, or even 3, goals that they hope to accomplish during our time together for the semester. Again, we're limited, and then it snows a lot up here, so we're kind of in and out of the classroom. But what do they think is achievable? What do they hope that they're going to achieve? Is it measurable? Can we assess that they're doing this, that they're making progress? Here are some of the goals that my students have set over time. I want to be able to start a basic conversation, introduce myself, and just be prepared for the next level. Is that a SMART goal? Is it specific? Yes. Is it measurable? Yes. Achievable, etc. So they kind of get the idea. And here's one kid said, oh, speaking of kinda, be able to kinda understand what my uncle is saying. Now, I have no idea what that means, but it meant something to him. And that's what a goal should be. It's not for me. It's not what they think I want to hear. It's what is going to be internalized for them. Be able to start a conversation, be able to tell who I am. And then Spanish 3, I also teach Spanish 3 very often, be able to understand spoken Spanish faster, use as much Spanish in class as possible, and be able to respond appropriately. And again, those are goals that I think are very appropriate for a level 3 intermediate low language learner. So again, teaching them the right vocabulary per se to use, just about how they're going to learn the language to start with. Sometimes I think we just jump in and start trying to teach the language. But I like to give my students, I do these things during the first week. We talk about the world readiness standards, proficiency levels. We set our goals during that first week just to lay the foundation of, man, this is going to be a journey, but I'm here to go through this journey with you. Okay, so now we've covered identify, understand about learning and setting attainable goals, and now we're going to focus and assess. So, focus, participate in class. That's what we want all of our students to do, right? And we know we have those language learners who just want to sit back and be passive and not interact with what's going on. And we know that can't happen in a language class. You have to interact in the target language in order to move yourself forward. So these are some strategies that I use to help students be able to do that. So you'll see on the next slide, I ask my students to set weekly language goals. And I realize that's kind of hard for them to do unless they see what's coming for the week. So my student teacher, yay, there she is, and I devised this little thing. Of course, we used our Bitmojis because that's just so much fun. And we did a snapshot of what's coming for the week. And we show this to them every Monday so that they'll know this is obviously the beginning of our unit about school. You can see I'm going to school. We're going to do some more with questions. We're going to learn how to tell time. And this, I don't have to say anything in English to the kids. They can figure out what this looks like so that they are ready to set their proficiency goal for the week. My proficiency goal for the week of blah, 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 blah is this. I will do this to achieve this goal. Did you achieve the goal? Why or why not? So I got this idea at a conference. A girl in Winston-Salem, I believe, Rhonda Higgins, said that she has her students set a daily language goal. And I was like, wow, that is very ambitious for my students. So I thought, let me try a weekly language goal. And setting goals is tricky and hard. But I mentioned in part 1 of the webinar that we're also teaching soft skills to our students. And I think goal setting is just a good skill to know in life in general. Sometimes people look at me and say, well, what's your goal for the next 5 or 10 years? And where do you see yourself after retirement? And I'm like, whoa, that is hard for me to put down, but I need to be mindful of those things. And so the earlier you can share those skills with students, the better off they're going to be. And even elementary or middle school students can set goals, and they can just be very basic. And again, this teaches kids to stay focused for the week. And so they set their goal on Monday. And every Friday, we assess that goal. And again, it keeps learning at the forefront of their minds. But again, just be aware, this is a little bit challenging at first until they get into things a little bit more, until they get into maybe, heavier topics or whatever, because at first there's just not that much happening in the language classroom. So they really have to figure out what is their goal. And then it's hard for them to say, something other than I will study to achieve my goal. I try to encourage them not to say things like that, to be very specific, like I will review my vocab sheet, or I will practice this topic online, or something, just so that it's a little bit more tangible than just I will study, because that's a little bit out there, right? And here's one close up. This was a little bit later on in the semester. I'll be able to describe my outfit. We were doing clothing, practice every day. Again, practice every day in class is a little bit too broad, but that's okay. Did you achieve it? Yes, because we practiced it a lot in class and she practiced it at home. So again, it's just getting kids to make put learning at the forefront of what's happening and think about those learning targets. Think about what their goal is for the week. And I have found this to be very, very effective. So hopefully you'll try it out. Also, speaking of learning targets, I don't do this all the time, and I really want to. So this kind of reminds me that this should be one of my goals this year. But putting the I can statements or the learning targets on each task that you give them, whether it's online or on paper or on the board or whatever, because again, it's just going to bring this to the forefront of their minds. They should be able to do these things if they watch this commercial and answer these questions. So it puts the learning right in front of the kids' faces. Okay, now we're switching over to assess, monitor your own progress. In part 1 of best practices for proficiency, you saw the learning targets I give kids. This is an example of a student who's filled one out. Now, I'm going to assume that the kid does have it. Let's hope. But again, what I do just for review is I give them these learning targets at the beginning of each unit. I mentioned that it's like a GPS. They know their destination, so learning is not a mystery. And every few days, maybe every 4 or 5 days, depending on the size of the unit, we pull these out. They take a quick look. Very often I'll be walking around during this time. They're monitoring their own progress. They have to demonstrate to me that they can do these things or to a friend, and then they just go ahead and mark themselves so that by the time the final assessment comes, there shouldn't be these giant gaps. We should have kind of closed those gaps on the way since I'm having them look at these statements so frequently. So they get to monitor their own progress. Okay, so this literally changed my life. Again, a couple years ago, I was introduced to this wonderful French teacher, Lisa Shepard, and she talked about making learning visible. And I was just like, this is it for me because I'm such a visual learner. And I think students seeing their progress or even their problem areas is really beneficial in going down the path to proficiency. So she suggests, and I've given you more information here. This is actually from her blog. And if you have a minute, just look at the amazing things she says. She's got such good ideas. But these are her examples. I modified the form just a little bit, but notice she focused on presentational writing and interpersonal speaking. So kids kind of have an idea of where they are. Now, this was early on. The image that you see here, obviously we hadn't done that many different activities at that point in time. But one of my students, maybe it was this girl, yeah, she was so pumped that she had improved her proficiency that she Snapchatted her mom and she was like, I have to tell her right now because look what's happening. And I'm sure the mom was like, what are you talking about? But also I have different rubrics that go along with these. My department, we actually devised these 4-3-2-1 scaled rubrics. So the kids have copies of these, so they know what a 4 means, they know what a 3 means, so it's just not like arbitrary. And they can see the descriptions that I have written out. I don't have those linked on here for you, but I'm happy to share those with you if you would like for me to share them. There are all kinds of rubrics out there. Again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of good ones from Ohio and just different states. So all you have to do is Google them. But if you have more questions about rubrics, I can be reached, of course, at carmenscoggins@gmail.com. But think about having your kids plot proficiency because, man, it was a game changer for some of my kids just to see where they were heading. Great. I also suggest if you have time, and you can build time in your schedule to conference one-on-one with students. Once again, if you can actually get a kid to verbalize how and what they are learning, I mean, you are golden, right? If you could just say, tell me what you still need to work on. So one of the things I do to build in time, we have a special time in our day called flex time, which is when our PLTs, professional learning teams, meet and students can come in for extra help, or if they missed something because they were at a soccer game, they can come make things up. And it's just a brilliant time during our day. It's 40 minutes every day. And so I might bring kids in during this time, but if you don't have a time in your day like that, I would give kids some kind of a lotto, and this is clickable also. You have access to this. These are just some I can statements we were working on. While I conference one on one with these kids, they can be working on these different activities to make sure that they know, are able to do, and understand these different topics we've been discussing. I also mentioned in part one the choice board idea, or actually that's coming up in just a minute, sorry. But when you see the choice boards, you'll know also if you give kids choice boards or modules or something to work on, that's going to free you up to walk around and conference one-on-one with students. It is a little bit time consuming, but again, this really changed the way I think about teaching, because the kids felt more a part of what was going on in my classroom, and they could contribute to our discussion. So it wasn't, they knew that I cared about what and how they were learning. So try to build this in if possible with your students. We'll see those choice boards in just a minute. So now we've done identify, reach, focus, and assess. And actually, the choice boards are coming up right here. So give students choice and voice. The more students can take ownership for their own learning, the better off they're going to be. If you keep spoon feeding them everything they need to know and just asking them to regurgitate things on some kind of vocab quiz or whatever, yes, that serves a purpose, but it's not getting into the deeper root of learning another language. So each of these, again, is clickable, and I'm not going to take the time to do that with you now, but you are welcome to do it on your own. Actually, I'll show you. I'll show you one at least. So this is going to take you to Google. Hopefully, if some of these links don't work, you just let me know and I'll make them visible. So this is actually a physical choice board in my room, as you can see. As you can see that it's an actual old, like 1970s magazine stand that I got from the library, and I put these folders in. And when you open up the folder, you see. Hang on, let's go back. Oh gosh, sorry. Okay, well, let me click it again. You see that there are learning targets so that my students can see what they have to do in each description. Okay, so for crea, then they have to do certain things, escucha, and if they need an audio file, then I've put it here in this Google folder for them. I got this idea of choice boards from Rosalind Rhodes in Charlotte. She's amazing if you've ever seen her present. So she gave me the idea, and I actually copied her exact different words here. But then I decided to make a virtual choice board. I actually use Canvas too, and build these opportunities as a module. And remember, in the next webinar that I send you, I'm going to be talking a little bit about Canvas, and I can show you an example of the choice board in Canvas. But again, it gives students the opportunity to choose something that they either want to work on or something that they know hits their learning style. Of course, my kids know what these words mean. What I typically do is require usually the speaking one, so that I make sure I get language production from all the kids, and then maybe have them choose 4 others or 5 others, usually 4, so that they're doing a total of 5 out of 8. So again, it gives them like ownership of what they're doing. It puts them in the driver's seat, and so they can say, well, I really like to draw, so I'm going to come grab this folder and see what that's all about. But one of the great things that has happened is I also encourage my kids, if they're not great listeners, to grab the escucha folder just to challenge themselves a little bit. And very often they do, because they know they need to improve their listening skills. So it's been just, again, a nice transition from me taking charge of the lesson all the time to them feeling like they have some ownership. It's great for differentiation, because kids know what their strengths and weaknesses are, and so they just can produce what they can produce. If it's not as much as someone else, that's okay. Also, I encourage my kids to work together a lot. We are a one-to-one school, and that means each child has a device. We are all now have Chromebooks, and so we do a lot with Google Docs. This is actually an online escape room that I designed. And so the teams have to work together. They have to solve problems in the target language. by using the Spanish that they should have learned in the unit. And so that's pushing them. That's what is that? Stephen Krashen, comprehensible input +1. That's pushing them a step further. So again, it's not just spitting back out memorized things that they've learned. They have to see if they can transition it into something that's a little bit different. So that's really fun. And they're obviously helping each other when they do that. These little boxes don't always sit on my tables, but I typically have my students working in groups, and so there's a box for each group. And I've given students some words that might help them level up in their writing or even their speaking. And these are just a couple of examples. My goal is to put lots of different cards in there that go with each unit. I'm not there yet because teaching is always a work in progress, but I want to give students, there are some students that are going to be okay with just learning the basic stuff that they have to learn to get through the class. We know those kids exist. But one of my downfalls is I'm not challenging all the kids that are ready to move faster and want to go farther with the language we offer through AP Spanish at our school. So I am trying to promote language learning in general. So if all the kid wants to do is do the basics, then that's that kid's choice. But for those kids who are ready to move faster, then I do things like this, level up. I'll give them some level up vocab on the board so that they can add it to however they keep their vocab list, so that they have extra words if they want them. That might not be important for someone, and it might be important for someone else. So encourage them or empower them to level up. Okay, train. This is great. Are any of you coaches out there, or any of you athletes? Awesome. I'm not either. But I do a lot of workshops on teaching like a coach, which is ironic since I've never been a coach. But one day I was walking around my classroom and I noticed that this kid was watching his basketball footage from the night before. And it dawned on me, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I need to do in the classroom. We need to train like an athlete trains. Doesn't that make sense? So what do we have at our disposal? We have all these amazing formative assessment tools like quizzes, Kahoot, and they all generate these spreadsheets so you can tell who is struggling with a specific question and what is a question that doesn't need any more focus, right? So those things are awesome, and those are drills. That's like a basketball drill. You would run the court, you dribble, you shoot free throws. Those are just drills that we might do with our kids. But something else I was thinking about, since this kid was taking my class time to watch his basketball footage, I was like, I'm going to start doing this with my class. So whenever my students do something like this,
Tres, dos, unos. Los osos salieron la casa.
Recitos de oro encontró en la casa.
okay, so they are, I'm sorry, I love these kids so much. I just have given them pictures of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's not authentic, but it is a story that they should be familiar with from their own childhoods. We were working on the 2 past tenses. This is Spanish 3, and they just had to open the folder. They didn't know what was inside, turn on their webcam, and start talking. Okay, so now that we have this footage, they have to, quote, go to the videotape and watch themselves and reflect. Again, it's that important word, and we'll talk about reflection in just a minute, and you'll see how I do that. But by having students watch and listen to themselves, now do they like it? Heck no, they hate it. They're like, oh, I sound so silly, or, I hate the way I sound on video. I didn't know what to do. But once they get into it and get used to it, then they can hear the mistakes they're making, and they can very often self-correct, or they can say, man, I should have said this here. And that is one of the skills that I'm trying to teach them. So it's really, really great. And they get to kind of learn from their own performance. Okay, so now we've done identify, reach, focus, assess, guide, and train. 2 more to go, guys. Hang in there with me. Process. Speaking of reflection, here we go. Reflect as we go. I have my kids reflect all the time. So you remember those I can statements that I gave them as their roadmap at the beginning of the unit? This is the second page of this. So they're going to tell me what they're proud of, what they want to improve, how they will improve, what they're going to do to improve, anything that particularly helped them, and other. And this person for other put, I feel super accomplished that I know how to do all of the things listed in the above chart. So again, quick, I let them write it in English, of course, and they just put on paper. Again, it's thinking about learning. They verbalize what and how they're learning. And this kid was really proud of herself. Now, going back to the Goldilocks and the Three Bears video, different tasks that we record, and I have them do that a lot. If you're not using Flipgrid by now, you really should be. I'm going to talk about that in the tech webinar that I do, but Flipgrid is free and it's amazing and it's a video. So once the kids videotape themselves with their cell phone or their device or whatever, they can go back and listen to it and then reflect. So again, this is just a rubric I borrowed and modified a little bit. Is my message understood? It's easily understood. How well do I use the language? I use simple sentences correctly, etc. Are my thoughts organized? Yes. How do I sound to myself? I sound okay. Then over here, I'm proud of I know how to answer each question without hesitating. I want to keep working on my pronunciation. I like doing activities like this because it helps to listen to yourself. Okay. And then I had a partner, listen to their audio or watch their video, and she said, "You don't hesitate. You sound awesome. Great accent." And then I put my comments there. So once again, this takes some class time, and I think some of us are so worried about scheduling and timing with our students, but this is teaching kids stuff that I could never actually teach them. Does that make any sense? By giving them the opportunity to sit on their own and listen to themselves, then they're going to learn from themselves and from their peers, and so I find the time worthwhile. Here's another one. That was level 1. This is level 3. And then it says, I'm proud of what we came up with. It was more spontaneous, so errors are to be expected. I want to improve pronunciation, confidence in speaking, okay, and then how they will practice and whatnot. And again, these are things that really just build confidence in students. One time a kid, man, it was brutal what she did on her video. Like, I could barely understand her, but I could. And again, is the message communicated? Is it understandable? Is that the goal of learning a language? I don't know. We want them to be accurate, but she needed to hear something positive from me, and she wanted to say something positive about herself. And so even though she was really hard on her own rubric when she assessed herself, she said, I'm proud of the fact that I didn't stop. And she didn't. And that was huge for her. And again, those are things I get chills just talking about, because those are things I couldn't really teach her. She had to experience for herself. So process and reflect as you go. And speaking of Flipgrid, you can also do reflections orally. If you click this, it'll take you out to a mixtape of some reflections that I had my students do. Now, this is my level 3s. These are my level 3s. I have them work in teams, and so they are reflecting, first of all, about their own journey, and then about whether or not they think that the team concept is working. Here's what Audrey has to say.
I think things are going pretty well so far. I think most of the things that I need to review more are things that we learned towards the end of Spanish 2, which I took over a year ago. So I kind of expected that. But other than that, I think in terms of myself and like my learning, I'd like to think I'm doing okay, but I don't know. I still want to work on being able to actually speak more without having to, write or plan out what I'm going to say.
Okay, again, so that's her take on how she's going to improve. And just hearing that from a kid in their own words is so powerful. Very often I have my students give me feedback like, how do you think things are going? I don't know why this is here. Okay. How do you think things are going? What can I do to better serve you? What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong as a teacher? And I tell them that I want them to be honest, and they're always afraid at first. They're like, really? And I'm like, absolutely, because this is how I'm going to grow as a teacher and how I'm going to really know how they feel. Why sit in a class and be miserable if something's not going well? And you'd be surprised at how grateful they are that I want their honest feedback, and I truly do. And that's just again, we're all on the same, well, we're all on similar paths to proficiency, and that's how we can learn and move forward together. So check out Flipgrid. I'll talk a little bit more about it in the tech webinar, but this is so great just to get them to verbalize different things that are making them better language learners. Also, I use former student testimonies to intrigue, especially my beginning language learners. This is demonstrate now, by the way, use the language outside the classroom. So I reach out, thank goodness for social media, right? I reach out to former students and I ask them how they're using the language in their lives, especially those who never thought they would. And you'd be surprised at how many former students I hear from that say, Miss Scoggins, I really wish I had paid attention to in your class because, I joined the Army and was in Spain for a while, or blah, blah, blah. I'm doing this in my job now, and I use Spanish in my life every day. I have one former student who works for the nonprofit Wine to Water, where they go into poorer countries and dig wells to help the community become more sustainable. And very often they're in a Spanish-speaking country. And this girl really wanted to learn Spanish, but I don't know if she thought she was going to use Spanish as much as she has, because they send her down there now because she can speak Spanish. And it's just so wonderful to see where our graduates have gone with their language skills. So consider using former student testimonies. Another thing I might use, if you guys are familiar with the app Remind, I don't always use Remind, but I always wonder why don't I use it, because it's really awesome. It's free, of course, and it just lets you send, the students have it on their phone, and you can send them a message. It comes in like a text message. So, of course, kids are going to be on their phones all the time anyway. And I mentioned I live in the Appalachian Mountains and it snows a lot up here, so sometimes in the winter we might not see each other for a week at a time. And so I might just send my students a remind message and just say, hey, how's it going during the snow days? What are you guys up to? All in the target language, of course. And not every kid has to respond, but it's surprising that they want to, because they're so bored, just like I am, because we've been out of school for 5 days. So it's cool to get responses from them. This is actually from a former student whose niece had just been born, or excuse me, not niece, nephew, and then she was describing him to me. So that was great, and she was using the language outside the classroom on a snow day. And another way I encourage that is I have a class Instagram page. So the way this works, if you're worried about using social media with your students, if the students have any image that they want to send me, they have to send it to me as a direct message on Instagram, and then I post the image. And then if they want to contribute to the discussion, then that's how it comes about, so that I don't have to worry that they're going to put something up that's inappropriate. I kind of monitor what goes on there. But again, this is funny. They'll send me these great things. Here's some other things. I went to our local grocery store and just started taking some pictures. I posted them and I was like, do you like menudo? And of course, because it's, gross. I'm just kidding. You might like it, but since it is what it is, the kids were like, well, I don't know. And then they all had to look up what it is and then say, oh, heck no, I'm not going to eat that, or whatever. Or yeah, we eat that in my house all the time, or whatever. But that was just funny because some of them didn't know what it was. And then we have a local restaurant that's called Los Arcos. It's actually called Los Arcoíris. And I saw this box and I wanted to see if they could connect it to something else in our community. This also makes students more aware of the Spanish that is in our tiny little community. They send me pictures all the time of different things that they've seen, and then I can post those. And again, it's them just using the language outside of the classroom. And honestly, that's the best kind of input. If the kids give me the input that they want me to use, I can't go wrong with that, right? Okay, so we are at the end of our journey. Identify, reach, focus, assess, guide, train, process, and demonstrate. Obviously, this is where we want students to be most of the time, but really they cannot get here unless they go through some of these other steps first. All right, guys, so our big takeaways from the student path to proficiency. All I'm going to say is encourage your students to level up when they can, guide them, ask them how they think things are going, and trust them so that they will trust you. That is huge. Be their biggest cheerleader. that's you. You know, they don't have anyone else in their corner very often, and you've got to be the ones to build them up and to boost them up. Yay, go. Celebrate whenever possible. Celebrate everything. Small successes. Tú puedes. You can do this. Okay? Don't forget, if you have any questions, you can contact me on Twitter or at Carmen Scoggins at Gmail, and I'll be happy to answer your questions or clarify anything. And all I'm going to say is just get ready, because your students are going to think you are lit. I wish you the very best of luck this year. I hope you try out some of these ideas. Remember not to get overwhelmed. Just pick one or two that you like. Try it out, and please let me know how it goes with your kids. Thanks for everything. Have a fabulous afternoon.